You're listening to TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour, with your host, the Director of Dixie Heritage, Dr. Ed DeVries.
If there was one thing that I loved when I was a kid, it was that every year we would take our vacation in the area of Branson, Missouri, Lake Taneycomo, Table Rock Lake, Taney County, that area. And I just loved it. The fishing there was great. Enjoyed the country music western shows. Loved Silver Dollar City. Used to love to go there as a kid. Used to love to go exploring in Marvel Cave, which you can still do, although now it's, I guess the National Park Service runs some kind of a tour or whatever in there now. And it's not as much of an open exploration as it used to be, but it's still a cool place to go and take your kids. But used to love to go to that area, and for years just wished that I could have moved to the Missouri Ozarks, even into my 30s. If you'd asked me, if I could live anywhere in the world I wanted to live, or anywhere in America that I wanted to live, where would I go? I would have said, without blinking, the Missouri Ozarks. And so the subject that I'm going to discuss today with Clint Lacy is something very near and very dear to my heart. Of course, going to that area as a young man, remember the Baldknobbers. Everything there is named after the Baldknobbers. And because the Baldknobbers were a group that featured prominently in the history of that area. Of course, Harold Bell writes The Shepherd of the Hills, a book that I read as a young man, and then as an adult went to the Shepherd of the Hills Theater and saw the play there. I don't know why I never saw the outdoor drama as a young man. It seemed like every year we were there, we were going to go, but for whatever reason, we went and saw their shows instead. And so finally, one year as an adult, in fact, I think it was the first year that I went down there as an adult, went down there on my own, and not down there with the grandparents and with the family, and I was entirely able to determine my own agenda while I was there. One of the first things I did was go to the Shepherd of the Hills outdoor drama, which is fairly representative, fairly true to the book, The Shepherd of the Hills by Harold Bell Wright. But the Baldknobbers, of course, feature prominently in that drama. And so I've always been fascinated with the Baldknobbers, but I've got to admit, I really haven't known a lot about them. I thought I knew a little bit about them, but as I read Clint Lacy's article in the Barnes Review magazine here a couple months ago, I realized, man, I really don't know anything about the Baldknobbers. And so I really had to start doing some research and doing some digging and kind of doing some reinvestigation there. But if you remember our August 17th Dixie Heritage Hour, our guest was Clint Lacy, and at that time he talked about his book, Blood in the Ozarks. And so we're going to have Clint back today because there was so much more that I wanted to talk to Clint about. Wanted to talk to Clint about the Baldknobbers. And also wanted to talk to Clint about Jesse James, and we're not going to have time to get into the Jesse James subject in today's broadcast. So know that we'll be bringing Clint back yet again at some point in the future to talk about Jesse James. But today we're going to have Clint again as our guest. He's going to talk about the Baldknobbers. During the interview, he's going to refer to a previous mention of some things, and when he says a previous mention, and you're thinking, I don't remember him saying that earlier in this interview, he's referring back to the August 17th interview. So if you've not yet listened to that or seen that on YouTube, if you have any access at all to YouTube, go back, type in the Dixie Heritage Hour for August 17th, 2018, and watch that interview with Clint and I, and it'll kind of give you a foundation for today's broadcast. Or if you have any questions after today's broadcast, just go back there and watch that interview again. So anyways, without any more tongue-tied this morning, without any more hubbubaloo, here is our interview with Clint Lacy. You live in Missouri. You live in the foothills of the Ozarks. I guess it was 2 or 3 issues ago now in the Barnes Review you had written on the Baldknobbers.
That's correct.
And I've always had a fascination with the Baldknobbers. Of course, if you go to Branson, Table Rock Lake area, you go to that area, they name all kinds of things after the Baldknobbers. Baldknobbers Restaurant, Baldknobbers Country Jamboree Music Show, Baldknobbers Hotel, all kinds of stuff are named after the Baldknobbers. And so I was a kid, and we take our vacation to Branson every year, and everything was named after the Baldknobbers, and they had the cool masks and everything. So I was really into the Baldknobbers. The Baldknobbers, of course, appeared prominently in Harold Bellwright, Shepherd of the Hills, and so forth. But yet, when I read your article, and I thought I had a little bit of an understanding of who the Baldknobbers were, but I read your research on the Baldknobbers and realized that I really didn't understand who the Baldknobbers were.
Well, it's a bit of a complicated story in itself.
And so tell us a little bit about the Baldknobbers and how did you come to become interested in the Baldknobbers yourself? Let's start there.
To answer that question, honestly, I don't know what inspired me to write that article. I've been to Branson a few times, but I guess like you, I'd always heard about them. I mean, they weren't on the eastern Ozarks like, where I'm at. They were on the western portion of the state. I guess it was just a desire to learn more about them, and what I found surprised even me. The original Baldknobbers, after the war, you have to understand one of the tactics that the Union did to Southern sympathizers would be they would either charge them back taxes and steal their land that way, or if somebody turned you in as a Southern sympathizer, you would have to go before the provost marshal and pay a bond to ensure your loyalty. If you didn't have the bond money, then you could put your property up as a bond. So naturally, they found ways to steal people's property in that manner. So the original Baldknobbers, all this property was lost. They were the Unionists who came in and bought it cheap. And the Southerners resented this, naturally. So the Baldknobbers were formed by Union veterans in Taney County, Missouri, to combat the Southerners. The Southerners formed the anti-Baldknobbers. The Baldknobbers, they were people you didn't really want to mess with. One of their tactics was, if they wanted you to leave the area, they left a bag of switches on your front porch. And if you woke up the next morning and there was a bag of switches on your front porch, it's time to go. Time to move. So nothing really happened to these guys because after the war, Confederates and Confederate sympathizers weren't allowed to hold office. So who did that leave to hold office? That was Unionists. So nobody ever convicted them because they weren't going to convict a fellow Unionist. So they just went about their rampage. And once you joined for life. You didn't get out unless you died. And part of the induction process was they took you out to what's known as a bald knob, which is a mountaintop with no trees on it. That's where they would have their meetings because they could see for a long distance. But anyway, they would take you out in this area and find a tree, throw a rope around it, put it around the inductee's neck, tighten it up to where they were standing on their tiptoes. That was the only thing that was keeping them from being hung. And then they made them swear an oath for life as the Baldknobber members all stood around them in a circle, and one member had a shotgun pointed at their chest. Once you were in, you were not getting out.
So it was the Masonic Lodge on steroids.
Yeah, that would be one way of describing it. Yeah, you're not going to choose not to attend meetings, though. You're going to the meeting, and you're going to do what we say. The Southerners formed the anti-Baldknobbers, and I believe it wasn't until the late 1880s things finally started to calm down. They said Taney County had 3,000 residents before the war, and after the war only had like 1,000 or 1,100. So you weren't going to get out of it. They formed the anti-Baldknobbers. And by the late 1880s, Confederates could vote again. People who either sympathized with the South or were Southern soldiers won the right to vote and hold office. So once they won their right to hold office and vote, they didn't really need to be the anti-Baldknobbers anymore. They could convict the ones that were. It's said that the Baldknobbers leader was a man named Nat Kinney. He was a former Yankee soldier. He weighed 300 pounds and was over 6 feet tall. I'm kind of glancing at the article over here on the side. And he finally met his demise. There was a Southerner who pretended to be his friend and caught him in a store one day and took a pistol off the shelf. Kenny pulled his gun. The Southerner was quicker. Shot Kenny in the wrist, broke his bone, which made him drop the gun. He shot him one more time. Kenny fell down. He shot him 3 more times after that. So that was that. And then there was another order of Baldknobbers in around Christian County, Missouri. They weren't necessarily Yankees. A lot of them were Southerners, and they got out of hand. And in one of their raids, they actually killed an innocent, and they were all prosecuted. I think 1 or 2 men were hung for that offense. But the original Baldknobbers were Yankees.
Of course, you would think of a group like the Baldknobbers, and you would think that they would have been a vigilante justice group, but instead, basically what you've discovered is they were not. They were the criminal group.
That's correct. Yeah, and a lot of people, you'll go on a tour or something, and they'll tell you they were a vigilante group that got out of hand. They'll tell you that on the tour, but it's not the case. Like you said, they were the actual perpetrators.
Their masks. What was the significance of their masks?
As far as I know, it's just to scare and intimidate, and a dual purpose: scare and intimidate, and protect their own identity.
Right. And so were there other vigilante groups that were operating in the area at the time, such as the Klan, or were they not basically able to get their foothold because of the Baldknobbers?
The only group I know of during that period was the anti-Baldknobbers. Now, I've done a little bit of research on post-war stuff here in the southeast Missouri, Ozarks, and there were a lot of groups not unlike the Baldknobbers. And it was been said that, they had a stated mission, but the real reason was to just rob and loot whatever they could.
Right.
And a lot of times, militias were formed to eradicate them. I believe the guy's name was Alf Boland, and it was I believe it's Shannon County, Missouri, which is in the southeast Ozarks. I believe it was a militia that finally got him, because after the war, he kind of kept his little gang together and just kept doing what he was doing during the war, and they finally tracked him down and killed him. I don't think the Klan really formed until later. Of course, going back to Colonel Jeffers, who I mentioned earlier, there was a Klan in the area after the war, but I don't know the exact time, but he was a former Confederate that actually formed a militia to combat the Klan. So the whole time I was being attacked by the SPLC for this defending a slaveholder or guy that fought in defense of slavery, they had no idea that he formed a militia to combat the Klan.
Right.
And I believe that was around in the Dexter, Missouri area, Dexter-Malden area, kind of the Boot Hill.
Right. And so the anti-Baldknobbers,
yeah,
did they have a costume of their own, or a mask, or a get-up, or did they just wear their regular clothes, or how did that work?
To my knowledge, I don't think they had a mask or anything. They might have, but their mission was to just eradicate the Baldknobbers.
Because I just wonder to what degree, not so much in the history, but in the legend, the activity of the Baldknobbers and the anti-Baldknobbers has melded together.
It's very possible. The articles that I researched just barely touched on the anti-Baldknobbers, and I just now realized that the articles I read, at least, never really described whether they they wore masks or not. So I really don't know about that one.
Okay.
Perhaps they did or they didn't.
Right.
But if you think about it, they were already targets anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, why hide your identity?
Right. So you said that the Baldknobbers were a lot of former Yankee soldiers. Did they maintain a military-like structure in their organization and in their activities, or no?
It was really just like guerrilla warfare, more or less. Their structure was kind of what you hinted at, more fraternal, but fraternal with consequences if you left or tried to expose other members. They told you during your initiation that you were a member for life and you would never get out of it unless you were dead. But their tactics were just intimidation tactics.
Right.
They said before the war, there was just, I believe, 3 murders in Taney County. And then after the war, it skyrocketed during the Baldknobber area. So you would have to think that the Baldknobbers had to be killing people.
Right.
The anti-Baldknobbers had to be killing Baldknobbers any chance they got, because that was just one more person that wouldn't be coming for them.
Right. So do you think that the anti-Baldknobbers knew who the Baldknobbers were? In other words, who the men were behind the masks, or do you think?
Yeah. Because they're the men that swooped in and bought their property up for the bogus back taxes they owed, and the bonds that they were forced to give on their property when they were outed, I guess you could say, to the Union authorities during the war. It wouldn't be hard to figure out who they were, because they were the ones that swooped in out of the area and just bought it all up.
Right. So then they wouldn't have to wait, say, for a Baldknobber raid to kill Baldknobbers. They could have been picking them off one at a time.
Yes, they could have.
Yeah.
That would, if I was an anti-Baldknobber, that's the tactic I would use. I mentioned a bushwhacker by the name of Sam Hildebrand early in the interview, and he's a good representative of how a lot of people became guerrillas or bushwhackers in Missouri. He was living in an area called Big River, north of Farmington, Missouri, Jefferson County. Jefferson or St. Francis, I don't remember. He didn't want any part of the war, but before the war, his cousin wanted to trade horses with him. But I said, okay. Well, they had what they called a vigilante committee. Now, this is pre-war, but not unlike the Baldknobbers. They just didn't wear masks. Vigilante committee tried to say he stole the horse. He said, no, I traded that horse with my cousin. I had no idea the history. Well, as soon as the war started up, the vigilante committee became federalized. They became a militia unit. So they came for him, and he had to flee. They ended up burning his mother's house, and I don't even think they left her a mattress. And he had another brother that was going to join the Union, I suspect just out of intimidation, because you had to, supposedly. And they murdered his brother. Once he moved from the Big River area to a place called Flatwoods in St. Francis County, they tracked him down there, attacked him in the middle of the night. He escaped up the back door with his gun and got to the woods, but he was shot either in the back or in the leg, and he laid in a ravine and covered himself up with leaves. And it wasn't long after that a Confederate guerrilla named Bolen, B-O-L-E-N, came by and recruited him for the Confederacy. So that's how Sam Hildebrand became a Confederate. It started off with the Vigilante Committee, who became federalized after the war. So a lot of these militias were no better than gangs. The only thing they had was the backing of the U.S. government, who all of a sudden made them legitimate.
Right.
And it was these tactics which caused a lot of men to join the ranks of the Confederacy, either in the regular army or as a guerrilla. Now, he was talking about picking men off one by one. That was one of Sam Hildebrand's favorite tactics. He had a rifle he called Kill Devil, and he made a notch in it every time he killed somebody. And after the war, he had over 100 notches. But they said it was not uncommon for him to ride 100 miles to try and get a shot off at one of these guys that was in the former Vigilant Committee, who tried to accuse him of stealing a horse and did all this stuff to his family. So that's how he chose to fight the war. And it would not surprise me if that's the way the anti-Baldknobbers fought the Baldknobbers.
Right. So were there other vigilante groups that were operating in the area? Other secret societies besides the Baldknobbers?
Yeah, I believe there was one called the Sons of Liberty, and several organizations like that. I know in southeast Missouri, that is. But from accounts I could read, they said it was to protect people, but from all accounts I read, it was just a license to steal.
Right.
So, as far as in the Taney County area, I don't believe there was any other organizations.
Well, I don't know that the Baldknobbers is a group that you could really. I don't know that Taney County was big enough for two such groups.
Yeah, especially since the population went from 3,000 to 1,000. Mm-hmm. So somebody had to go.
Right. So how do you think it is that the Baldknobbers came to be so, do I say idolized, heroized, romanticized in the Branson area, given the fact that they were just a bunch of wicked, murderous scoundrels?
Legends, myths, an idea for a tourist. Mm-hmm. I really think that's how it started.
So do you think that the people who are selling us this Disneyland version of the Baldknobbers, do you think that they know the truth? Or do you think that that the legend has been propagated for so long that it's replaced the truth?
I think people from out of town, probably in that area, that just take the job or given a script. Mm-hmm. And the script says they started off with good intentions and got out of hand. It depends on which side you were on, whether they started off with good intentions, because if you're a Southerner and they bought your land for cheap over some bogus tax bill or some inaccurate accusation somebody leveled on you, then they weren't for good, that's for sure. You're looking at somebody that came in and took everything you worked for, your farm, your cattle, your property. I mean, but I think for people in the area who know the history, they know the difference. I actually have a friend that works in the Baldknobber show, and he knows the difference.
Well, I can remember as a kid and even as an adult going to places like Silver Dollar City, going to one of the gift shops. And in fact, I still have a Confederate belt buckle that I bought in the gift shop at Silver Dollar City.
Yep.
And, of course, now if you go into the gift shop, you can no longer buy the Confederate belt buckle. It's been sanitized, but you can still buy the Baldknobbers mask.
Yeah, isn't that a coincidence?
Yeah. So does that mean that the Baldknobbers ultimately won? It took them 160 years, but...
yeah, I guess you could say that. Or it's just part of the bigger agenda.
Right.
I remember as a kid you go to Six Flags in St. Louis, and parts of it were set up kind of like Silver Dollar City. You know, they had a section that was kind of rustic or whatever, and you could buy Confederate hats and flags and belt buckles there, but there's no way you will see that now. There's no way. And it's just part of the bigger agenda, and maybe I'm going past where this conversation needs to go, but the agenda to get rid of such symbols, you have to wonder why. Well, you have to realize they want a globalist society. And in a globalist society, there's no room for regional identities. There's certainly no room for identities and history of a people that fought the system, if you will.
Right.
So, yeah, I think they won. The Baldknobbers ultimately won. But probably with some help
right.
from the outside.
Well, this goes back to a conversation that I had with John Friend actually in the Barnes Review back last year in the September-October issue. Remember, that was the Defending Dixie issue.
Yep.
And I remember telling John at that time, one of the reasons that you're seeing such a tremendous attack against the South and the Confederacy right now is because this is globalism's big push right now, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are going to establish a new world order, if you are going to establish a global order, it is a lot easier to absorb or to subjugate one president, one Congress, one Supreme Court than it is to do the same with 50 governors, 50 state legislatures, 50 state Supreme Courts.
Right.
And so states' rights is a concept that has to go.
Yes.
Because it's a lot easier if the United States is one government, if it's one entity, that can be absorbed into the larger whatever is coming. But
Probably.
If the United States is what our Constitution says it is, which is 50 sovereign, independent, cooperating but independent states, well, it's a lot harder to bring 50 governments into a global order than it is one.
Well, we know that's not the case anymore. Mr. Lincoln took care of that problem.
Right.
So now, always said before the war, the states had more power than the federal government. And after the war, the states were subservient to the federal government. And the reason they can pass anything they want now is the states are so dependent on the federal money for highways, infrastructure, and things of that nature that say they want a federal law in which, say take the legal alcohol limit from 0.08 to 0.06. Well, if there's a governor who says, no, I don't agree with that, the first thing they're going to say is, well, I guess you don't get your highway money. So they cave, and governors now are really just nothing but administrators. And as far back, as recently as President George W. Bush, I don't know if you remember him saying, the Constitution is nothing more than a GD piece of paper.
No, I don't remember that, but it doesn't surprise me that he would.
And that's their whole attitude. So it's supposed to be enforced. We're supposed to be separate, but united, cooperating. But after the war, that's not the case, and it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse as it goes along. It got worse in, was it 1913 or 16 where they hatched a plan for the Federal Reserve on Jekyll Island.
Right, 1913.
Yeah, okay. So, after the war, after Reconstruction, the states still had some little bit of power. Mm-hmm. Then comes 1913. Federal Reserve is hatched in secret on an island off the coast of Georgia. Well, that pretty much sealed our fate, didn't it? Because now you have the the Treasury printing money at the cost of pennies to produce this money, but the money is borrowed from a bank overseas, and now you're paying millions and trillions of dollars of interest on what cost you a few pennies.
Right. And, it's funny because, of course, that interview will air probably before this one does. But it has not aired yet. Although part of that subject was covered in the interview that aired actually last Friday. But, of course, our recording of these interviews and when they air is varied. But the last interviews that I recorded were with a banker named Bob Oaf, and he talked a little bit about that as well. And it's amazing just how basically our own government has conspired to steal our nation's wealth.
Oh, yeah.
And give it to others, mainly to Europeans.
The Chinese.
Yeah.
China. Yeah.
Did you see my my article in the American Free Press that actually went in the mail today?
No, I haven't.
Okay, I hit Jair Bolsonaro. He is the basically the Brazilian Donald Trump, and he's running for president in Brazil right now. And he was at a press conference the other day, and that's what he said. He said, "Open your eyes, look around. China is buying Brazil." And,
yeah, I'm sure they are. They've bought everything else.
Yeah. So it's just. But yeah.
Ed, my phone is about to go dead.
Okay.
Do you want me to charge it and call you back, or you want?
We will go ahead then and take advantage of this technical difficulty to pause for a brief commercial message from our sponsor, the Barnes Review, and then we'll be back with our guest. If you love listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, then I know that you'll love reading the Barnes Review. The Barnes Review is one of my favorite magazines. I began reading the Barnes Review long before they became a sponsor here on the program. In the Barnes Review, you will read vignettes of man, from the prehistoric to the very recent, from forgotten races and civilizations to first-person accounts of World War II and the late Cold War. There's just not a more interesting magazine published today, nor a more significant and important subject than real history. So if you'll visit www.barnesreview.org, that's www.barnesreview.org, you can find out how you too can become a subscriber to the Barnes Review. You can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review by mail, or you can subscribe to receive the Barnes Review electronically in PDF editions. Or you can subscribe to receive both. That's what I do. So visit www.barnesreview.org and subscribe to the Barnes Review. Talk about the New World Order a little bit, the global conspiracy. Do you believe that it was in play during the 1860s and that the war between the states and dividing America was part of that conspiracy even 160 years ago?
I've heard different theories. I heard, you hear theories that the globalists were backing the South because they wanted the United States to break up, and then you hear that Lincoln was the one that tried to save the republic, if you will. I definitely do not believe the South were fighting for globalists. I think it's as simple as a story that was told in which a Yankee was talking to a captured Confederate and said, "Why are you fighting?" Because you're looking at his condition, And the Confederate looks at him and he says, "Because you're here." As far as globalism in the war, I just don't know. I do know that that Lincoln wanted the federal government. He wanted the states to be subservient. That's what he wanted. And we all know, well, maybe we don't all know, before the war, 80% of the nation's taxes were coming from import tariffs imposed on the South. That money was then going to the north to build railroads and canals. Many of these things never got finished. And I believe that was the main motivating factor for the war. The South had enough of it and wanted to secede. Lincoln was not going to give up that tax money. I think the issue of freeing the slaves didn't come about until at least 1863, when they could use it as a moral cause, to say their cause was just because they're fighting to free slaves, when in fact there's a lot of evidence that shows Lincoln himself was a racist.
Right.
Now, as far as globalists goes, perhaps not, but I think we could probably say that Lincoln's position he took on the Constitution and the states and the federal government very well paved the way for foreign intervention.
Right. Well, I definitely believe that the reason that the Russians intervened on behalf of the North is because I believe that the Tsar saw that the bankers in Europe had their designs on this country.
Mm-hmm.
And I do not believe that the Tsar's... I believe the Tsar could have cared less about the Southern people one way or the other. In other words, I don't believe he was against the Southern people. I just believe he didn't have an opinion there because he was all the way in Russia. But what he could see was the European bankers getting their fingers into the cookie jar over here, so to speak. And he did not want to see that happen. And so I believe that his intervention on behalf of the North was not so much an anti-Southern or an anti-Confederate move as it was a message to the Rothschilds and the European bankers to stay on their side of the pond.
It makes sense.
Yeah, that he wasn't going to let them come over here and do to North America what they had done to Europe.
Right. Well, and we all know what happened to the Tsar later on.
Right. And of course, the Tsar. That was. In fact, I'm interviewing Raphael Johnson here tomorrow, and so that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. But
he was kind enough to write the foreword for my book that's going to be out soon. It's entitled "A Beginner's Guide to False Flags." He wrote the foreword for me.
Okay,
he's a good guy.
Yeah, who's going to publish that book?
TBR.
Okay, and so they'll be able to go to the Barnes Review website and they'll be able to get a copy of that.
Yep.
So, do you mind giving us a little bit of a preview of what's going to be in that book?
Yeah, in a nutshell, what I do is I take events stemming back at least to the explosion of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, Cuba, up until, through the election, 2016 election. And what I do is I give the official narrative of a story, and then I provide information in which that story has holes poked in it. So I'm giving you the official story, and then I'm giving you information that disproves the official story. And it's just, I call it a beginner's guide because I don't go through all of the events which could be considered a false flag, but it's a good introduction to them.
I don't think it's covered in your book, although if it is, you can certainly tell us. But Charlottesville, Virginia, and what happened there? Do you believe that was a false flag?
Yeah, I do. And I'll tell you why. No matter what people think of the alt-right or nationalist or Southern nationalist, however you want to describe people, they had a permit to be there. They had the legal right to be there at that park. And what happened as soon as they got there, they noticed they're divided in half at first, and then there was only one way in and one way out. Then all of a sudden, before anything happens, Governor McCullough declares a state of emergency And of course, he's friends with Bill and Hillary Clinton. So the police tell the nationalists and alt-right people that they got to leave the park. And I remember one story, a person said, well, can't you just leave it? Let us leave out the back, knock those barricades down? Nope. You got to come in or leave the way you came in. So they set this up to implode. And there was an ad for crisis actors after this all happened. There was an ad for, I believe the company's called Crowdsourcing. I believe that's what it is. And they were advertising $25 an hour plus gas and parking if you showed up to be a protester. Some people stated that they saw the Klan and Black Lives Matter get off the same bus, which are things I don't think are going to happen naturally.
Right. Do you remember the cartoons when the coyote and the sheepdog would chase each other around, and then they would hit the time clock and they'd eat lunch together? And
yeah, it's a lot like that, isn't it? The helicopter that came down and killed those state patrolmen. I read somewhere where they said they had a lot of mechanical problems with that helicopter. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like they set everybody up for failure.
Right.
They let the people who did not have a permit run the show. They stood down as, nationalists for getting beaten. And then they convict the nationalists for fighting back, and then the liberal Antifa BLM types, if they get punished at all, it's kind of a slap on the wrist, maybe a month in jail or 3 months, And one guy, I can't remember his name, but he got convicted for beating up a black guy in a parking garage. And you saw all the news stories saying, oh, he was the black guy was such a good guy, blah, blah, blah. But what they didn't show is the video of the black guy coming at him with it was either a large mag flashlight or a baseball bat or whatever, saying what he was going to do to the white guy and attacking him. So it was very carefully organized chaos. Maybe that's the way to put it.
Okay.
And it pretty much shut down the alt-right movement. Jason Kessler had Unite the Right 2 in Washington this weekend, and maybe 25 people showed up. And then all you heard in the news prior to this weekend was that Antifa was going to hold a rally for healing in Charlottesville. There were no nationalists in Charlottesville this weekend, but yet there was violence. And the only people who showed up was Antifa. There's video of them surrounding a cop and just beating the crap out of this cop. And the nationalists weren't there, so they called the cops KKK.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Chaos ensued this year, and there were no nationalists there. So you tell me who the problem is.
Right. So have there been any other false flags basically trying to paint Confederates and Southern patriots in a bad light that you know of?
Yeah, the Charleston church shooting.
I've often suspected that as well. My personal belief is that photograph of Dylan Roof with the Confederate flag was photoshopped.
Well, let's say it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, somebody, I believe on Facebook, made a very good point after that happened. They said there's also pictures of him wearing a Gold's Gym T-shirt, so when are they going to shut down the gym?
Right.
Yeah, the kid just didn't act right. In any little bits of video you saw of him during the trial or before the trial, he acted like a controlled person. Mm-hmm. And even after he shot up the church, he said, well, they were nicer than I expected they would be. There was really no motive to it other than he was white and they were black. But it was after that Nikki Haley orders the Confederate flag lowered, taken down in Charleston, which has been there, since the 1950s, right, at least. And she just happens to be she has an American name, but that's not a real name. I can't remember what a real name is.
I think it's called like Nikrama Himrata or some. Yeah,
it's not Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
And then she tries to erase other cultures, and then you see her still participating in Hindu ceremonies. I don't think her being there was a coincidence. I don't think her using that opportunity to take that flag down was a coincidence. We were just talking about globalism and how they need to erase any forms of identity that's going to conflict with their agenda. So she uses that to lower the flag down. She's foreign born. She's not part of our culture. There's all kinds of rumors of her having affairs and stuff before she was elected. A lot of people were glad when Trump made her ambassador UN because they said she was out of South Carolina.
Right.
But at the same time, she's running her mouth on a global level now, and she's even contradicted Trump a few times. And I'm sitting here thinking, you need to get rid of her, just like you need to get rid of Jeff Sessions. I was listening to Roger Stone on the Alex Jones show, and he called Jeff Sessions Foghorn Leghorn. He said, we have Foghorn Leghorn as an attorney general because there are all these issues. He won't touch the Mueller investigation. He won't touch anything of that nature. There's a lot of things he won't touch, but he's declaring war on marijuana.
Right.
When there's other things he could be doing, and really you can trace his recusal of himself from that investigation to the problems Trump is having now. I don't think he did it because it was the right thing to do. I think he recused himself because he's a coward.
Right.
And he's a Southerner geographically. He's from Alabama. But above all else, he's a politician. He don't want to make waves one way or the other. Right. He definitely doesn't want to do his job, does he?
Yeah. I've wondered because Sessions was one of Trump's earliest supporters in the Senate in D.C. And I've wondered if he wasn't planted in the Trump campaign early on, just in case Trump were to be elected, and the Plan B would have to go into effect. And I do believe that the whole Russian collusion story is the Plan B. If in the unlikely event that Trump were to win the election, despite all of the efforts to rig it to the contrary. And so was Sessions put in the Trump campaign as a spoiler from the very beginning? And so now, we're he's basically doing the job that he was put in there to do all along.
It certainly seems that way, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But, we can speculate about those things, I guess you'd say till the cows come home.
Yeah.
But I believe that Jeff Sessions at one time was a member of the Sons of Confederate Veterans.
I wouldn't doubt it. I don't know if he is now or not. I wouldn't doubt it if he, let his membership lapse.
Right. I know. I know that a lot of Southern politicians, for example, I can remember when Trent Lott was in the Sons of Confederate Veterans.
Mm-hmm.
And he may still be. Of course, Trent is not politically active right now, and so he wouldn't face the same repercussions for being in the SCV that more active politicians would. But I know he's not really active in the SCV, but his membership may still be in place. I don't know. But I can remember, and this was back probably 15 years ago, I can remember Wilson. I cannot remember Commander Wilson's first name now. Ron Wilson, yes. Ron Wilson was Commander-in-Chief of the Sons of Confederate Veterans. And I was at Elm Springs, Tennessee, and the conversation was between myself, Ron Wilson, and John Weaver, who at the time was the chaplain-chief.
Yep.
And Ron Wilson was asking Chaplain Weaver and I's opinion of the fact that Bill Clinton wanted to join the Sons of Confederate Veterans and wanted to do a recruiting video for the SCV. And I remember Ron telling us, he said, I know that Bill has to have a political angle on this. Of course, George W. had just become president, and so Clinton was no longer the president. He said, but still, he said, Clinton has to have some political angle on this. Well, I don't know what it is, but do we play along with this and try to get some traction, or do you think that putting a Bill Clinton recruiting video out would have the opposite effect and people wouldn't join?
Yeah, I would say opposite effect.
Yeah, and so we never did do the Bill Clinton recruiting video, and I don't know if Clinton ever joined or not. I'm sure if he sought to join, he would have been allowed, but we never did the recruiting video.
My guess is, we're just speculating here, Hillary probably had been planning to run for president ever since Bill was impeached. Mm-hmm. And it was probably a method he was thinking of, either to recruit people to her side, or some way to siphon money out of it.
Right. Well, I know this, looking back at everything, I really wish we would have made that recruiting video. So that if nothing else, during the last election cycle, when the Confederate flag was such a hot button issue, we could have pulled that video out and, dusted the mothballs off of it and stuck it in the VCR, if you will, and said, okay, here's Bill Clinton.
Yep.
And so I think we could have got some traction, even if it didn't do anything for us back 15 years ago. I think we had got some traction on it a couple of years ago, year and a half ago.
Served more of a purpose now than then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
If you're like me, and I'll bet you are because you're listening to the Dixie Heritage Hour, you like to be on the cutting edge of honest news and accurate information. You like to hear about the latest financial trends and to know what's happening around the world and right here in the United States, the things that can directly impact you, your life, and the life of your family. And if you're like me, you do not rely on the mainstream media to obtain this information because, frankly, you know that you just can't trust them. Fortunately, there is an alternative news outlet with a long-established track record for honesty and integrity, and that is the American Free Press. AFP is the preeminent alternative, independent news source for honest, hard-working, truth-loving Americans. AFP is the antithesis of the controlled, lamestream media. AFP is employee-owned and has been so since its founding. Because of that, AFP never has and never will allow advertisers or special interests or big money to dictate what appears in the pages of the American Free Press newspaper. 26 times a year, the American Free Press newspaper can be delivered to your door, packed with the kind of uncensored news that I know you're going to appreciate. AFP covers the stories and tells the truth that the lamestream media is frankly scared to touch. And AFP offers real, on-the-scene reporting and commentary, the likes of which you will never see in the Washington Post, the New York Times, ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, or just about any other lamestream news source that you can think of. That's right, there's only one national populist news weekly staffed by an unsurpassed team of veteran investigative journalists who will dare to rip the veil off of many of the major news stories, and that's the American Free Press. AFP publishes exciting, in-depth, uncensored news and information that's grassroots and patriotic, information that Americans need to know in order to combat the growing police state. AFP stands firmly against the New World Order, and against those who are working to establish a global plantation under the rule of a powerful few. In short, AFP is your voice. If you have any doubt why they want to silence AFP, you must be relying on the lamestream media for your news, and folks, that's a big mistake. If you're ever dissatisfied with your subscription to the American Free Press, their guarantee is that you just drop them an email and they will gladly refund the unused portion of your subscription. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.americanfreepress.net. Once again, www.americanfreepress.net.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour. I hope you enjoyed our interview with Clint Lacy and our discussion of the Baldknobbers. Of course, we jumped around just a little bit, got into a lot of other subjects as well, but I believe all subjects that would be of interest to our listeners. Of course, we talked a little bit during the broadcast about the New World Order, and you say, well, what does the New World Order have to do with a group like the Baldknobbers who operated in the post-war between the states era in the Missouri Ozarks? It just goes to show you that these political factions, these things have been at play for decades, for generations, and it spans even beyond our lifetimes. And so history is a series of things that build one upon another and so forth. And so that's why the discussion of one subject sometimes can lead to another and so forth. But I trust that you enjoyed our conversation today. What I'd like to ask you to do is to go to the Barnes Review website. I was going to give you the back issues of the Barnes Review to go look at for Clint's article on the Baldknobbers. Unfortunately, the Barnes Review website at this moment of recording seems to be under some kind of an attack, some kind of a cyber attack. I'm not exactly for sure what's going on, but the liberals and the Marxists and the social justice warriors and the social justice keyboard warriors, whatever, from time to time will attempt stuff like this against conservative websites. And so hopefully by the time you're listening to this, the Barnes Review website will be back up and running again. So go to barnesreview.org and just type into the search engine there, type in Baldknobbers, Baldknobbers, and it should bring up the back issue with Clint's excellent article on the Baldknobbers. While you're there, click on the radio link and you can find the back episodes of TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour. Scroll back down to our August 17th broadcast and listen to my first conversation with Clint Lacy. I think you'll find it very enjoyable and very enlightening. Also, take the time to go to my website, www.dixieheritage.net. When you're there, you'll be able to sign up for a free copy of my book, The Truth About the Confederate Battle Flag. No cost, no obligation. You don't have to give me a credit card number. You don't have to mail me a check. You don't have to give me your phone number or anything. Just give me a valid email address and I'll send you a PDF copy of this best-selling book right away. And when you do, I'll also sign you up for our free weekly newsletter, the Dixie Heritage Letter, which you'll begin receiving on Fridays. Keep you up to date with all the news that is news, especially in relation to Southern heritage. Then go back to Google or Bing or your favorite search engine, DuckDuckGo, whatever it is that you use, and type in Clint Lacy, Blood in the Ozarks, and look up Clint's great book. We didn't talk about it in this interview. We talked about it in the last interview, but look that up, or just go to the TBR bookstore, and you'll find Blood in the Ozarks there. It's a great, great read. And, I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to our broadcast. Thank you for being our listener here at TBR Radio Presents, the Dixie Heritage Hour. So, however you're listening to the program today, we ask that you come back same bat time, same bat channel next week, and we'll be back again with another interesting interview, another hour that we will look forward to spending with you. So until then, from all of us at TBR Radio Presents the Dixie Heritage Hour, God
Breaker
bless.
one, breaker one. Might be crazy, but I ain't dumb. Crazy cooter coming at you. Hey, y'all, got your ears on? Well, I got some news for you. We're here at our brand new Cooters in the Country store in Sperryville, Virginia. Good old Sperryville, where Cooters started many years ago. Folks are coming from all over Hazard County, and we're going to have a grand old time with good music, good food, and best of all, good friends. Hope y'all can be there. Whoop, whoop, here come Enos. Huck got Cletus with him. I'm down and I'm gone.